You've disgraced the family, her father shouted, throwing his 16-year-old pregnant daughter out of the house. When the child's father denied them in court, the young girl cursed him. And 24 years later, she came back to her hometown in her own Mercedes, and what happened next shocked everyone. Dear friends of the channel About Stories and Fate, before we continue, write where you're watching us from and how old you are. Enjoy listening. If they catch us, my father will lose his job, Farrah whispered, but still took the cassette. Her thin fingers trembled as she slid the forbidden tape into the player. He won't, Jack wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. The farm director's son listens to glam rock. What crime is that? The music blended with the rustle of grape leaves. Farrah closed her eyes, soaking in every note, every word. Around them stretched the California summer of 1979, hot, dusty, smelling of grapes and forbidden freedom. My father says this music corrupts the youth. Farrah turned to Jack, the sunset reflected in her amber eyes. But can music really corrupt anyone? Instead of answering, Jack touched his lips to her temple, then her cheek, then her mouth. Farrah flinched at his touch, but didn't pull away. The sun was slowly sinking behind the horizon, and their shadows merged on the grass into one long, slender shape, like a poplar tree. You know, I got a letter from Stanford. Jack's voice sounded muffled, like through cotton. They accepted me into law school. Farrah jerked back, her copper hair flaring like a fiery train. You're leaving? Her voice carried both hurt and fear. Not right away. In the fall, he pulled her close again. We still have the whole summer, Farrah. She wanted to snap back with something sharp, something proud, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she pressed against him harder, breathing in the smell of his skin mixed with cheap cologne. A whole summer, she echoed, her words heavy with the bitterness of what she already sensed. Their love bloomed in secret, in an abandoned house on the edge of town, in the shady vineyards, behind haystacks in the fields. They left notes for each other hidden in her chemistry book. At 6 by the old oak. Waiting for you, Jack. Can't wait for tonight. My heart beats like a drum. Last night I dreamed about you. Can't tell you, too embarrassing. Farrah. One blazing July afternoon, with cicadas buzzing in the fields and the air trembling from the heat, they met at the abandoned house. Its cracked walls still remembered the Great Depression, when families had left in search of work. You've never been to New York? Jack stood by the window, his dark silhouette outlined against the bright light. No, my father's against it. Farrah sank onto the old mattress they had dragged there a week earlier. Sometimes I wake up and I swear I can smell the city, even though I've never been there. Jack sat beside her, taking her hand in his. When I'm a lawyer, we'll go there together. To New York. Farrah laughed, but there was bitterness in her laughter. You'll become a lawyer and marry some professor's daughter, with the right last name and the right family background. Not true, he tucked a loose strand of her copper hair behind her ear. I don't need anyone but you. Their lips met, and the world outside the old house disappeared. There was only the two of them, their breath, their pounding hearts, the salty taste of skin. On the old mattress, among dust and cobwebs, they loved each other for the first time, awkward, hurried, hungry. Farrah bit her lip to keep from crying out from the mix of pain and joy, then burst into tears, burying her face in Jack's shoulder. I'm sorry, he whispered, kissing her tear-streaked cheeks. I didn't want to hurt you. I'm not crying from pain, she smiled through her tears. I'm crying because I'm happy. By August, Farrah's mother, Fatima, received food stamps. The line at the grocery store stretched across Main Street. Don't shame me, stand up straight, Fatima hissed when Farrah leaned against the wall, dizzy. People are watching. I don't feel well, Farrah muttered. For the third morning in a row I've been sick. Fatima spun toward her, her worn face twisting as sudden realization struck. When was your last period? She whispered. Farrah dropped her gaze. Her heart pounded wildly. I don't remember, she lied. Doesn't remember. Fatima gripped her daughter's hand so hard that Farrah cried out. Home. Now. They walked down the dusty road. A fresh poster hung in the town square, support the local team. A group of kids in t-shirts rehearsed some song. At home, Fatima locked the door and turned on her daughter. Tell me, who is he? Farrah stayed silent, staring at the floor. Jack? Cameron's son? Farrah lifted her eyes, defiance burning in them. And he loves me. Her mother's slap was sharp and sudden, leaving a red mark across Farrah's cheek. Loves you? Fatima let out a bitter laugh. Boys like him don't marry girls like us. To them, we're dirty immigrants, outsiders. Remember that. When her father Ahmed came home that evening, Fatima told him everything. His reaction was worse than anything Farah could have imagined. He beat her long and methodically, without a word, only exhaling now and then through clenched teeth. "You've disgraced the family, worthless girl. You've disgraced us." Later, when Farah lay curled up on the floor, Fatima carefully dabbed the blood from her face with gauze and whispered ancient prayers. "Tomorrow we'll go to Cameron," Ahmed said hoarsely, lighting a cigarette. "He'll marry her if he's made this mess." The Cameron's house stood on a hill, a two-story brick home with a covered porch and an antenna on the roof. When Farah and her parents walked up to the gate, Jack's mother appeared on the porch, a tall woman with platinum-dyed hair and an expensive dress with a sparkling brooch. "What do you want?" She didn't even try to hide her contempt. "We need to speak with your husband," Ahmed said firmly, "about our daughter and your son." 5 minutes later, they were sitting in the living room. Jack's father, the farm owner William Cameron, paced the room, drumming his fingers on the table. "So you're claiming my son?" "My son has never admitted that this is his child," Jack's mother cut in, giving Farah the kind of look you give a stray dog. "That girl's been hanging around all over the county, and now she's trying to latch onto Jack because he's going away to college. She just wants to get to the city, little beggar." Farah flinched as if struck. Beggar. That word burned more than any slap. It meant, you're nothing, you have no dignity, no future. "My daughter isn't lying." Ahmed stood tall, fists clenched. "If your son won't admit to his child, we'll go to the police." William Cameron burst out laughing. "The police? Are you out of your mind, Ahmed? Better think about how you'll put bread on the table tomorrow. One phone call, and you're out of a job." At that moment Jack walked in. He froze in the doorway, looking at Farah, and something flickered in his eyes, shame, maybe, or fear. "Jack, tell them," Farah stood up, reaching her hands toward him. "Tell them you love me." He looked at her for a long, agonizing minute, then turned to his father. "Dad, I don't know whose child she's carrying." His voice was steady, calm. "We were just friends." Farah staggered, grabbing the edge of the table. Darkness filled her vision, voices around her turned distant, muffled, like underwater. "You see?" Jack's mother's voice rang triumphant. "I told you. She only wants money." The last conversation with Jack happened on Farah's porch. He came at night, sneaking around, glancing over his shoulder. "I can't marry you," he spoke softly, avoiding her eyes. "Please understand, I need to study. I have my whole life ahead of me." "And me?" Farah gripped a handkerchief in her hands. "I don't have a life ahead of me. Prove the child is mine." At last he lifted his eyes. "Maybe you were with someone else?" She didn't curse him. She just stared, long and hard, memorizing every line of his face. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Go," she finally whispered. "Go, coward." When he left, Farah wept like she never would again in her life. She mourned her dreams, her naivety, her childhood. In their place, something new was born, hard, unbending, like steel. Labor began on a February night in 1980. Her father refused to take her to the hospital, so Fatima secretly called the only vehicle in town, an old farmer's pickup. Farah bit down on a worn hospital sheet to keep from screaming. The pain came in waves, each one stronger than the last. Outside, the February wind howled, and from a radio on the wall drifted old songs, a false melody about a love that didn't exist. "Push!" The midwife barked. Again. Harder. When the first cry of the baby broke through, Farah cried too, not from pain, not from joy, but from understanding. She would never be alone again. Now she had someone for whom she was the whole world. A boy. The midwife laid the tiny bundle on her chest. Healthy, strong. "What will you name him?" Farah looked at her son's red, wrinkled little face. She already saw hints of Jack in him, the shape of his eyes, the line of his nose. But there was something of her too, the stubborn curve of his mouth, the high cheekbones. "Ramin," she whispered. "His name is Ramin." As she drifted off to sleep with her son in her arms, Farah thought about the meaning of his name, one who honors God. He would need all of God's help to survive in this world without a father. They both would. Outside the hospital window, the winter sun rose slowly, painting the snow a rosy shade, like pomegranate seeds bursting open. "Mama, I'm cold," Ramin murmured, pressing his small body against her chest. His child's voice was weak. "Hold on, baby, hold on." She tightened the knot on the worn blanket, wrapping him into a cocoon. "Mama will finish quickly, and we'll go home." Home, as Farah called it, was a corner in a freezing barracks for migrant workers, 8 square meters cut off from the rest by a plywood wall. And even that wasn't theirs, just a temporary shelter they had to work off. She lifted a trowel heavy with plaster and went back to smoothing the wall in the city council chairman's apartment. Her hands, cracked from lime and cold, moved quickly and surely. For a day's work she would get a loaf of bread and a little money, a luxury in those times. "Hey, girl, your kid's crying again," the landlady called out, a plump woman in an expensive sequined robe. "Quiet him down, or the neighbors will complain again." Farah picked Ramin up in her arms. His little body was burning, the fever had come back again. "I have to finish today," her voice was strained. "He needs medicine, don't you understand?" The landlady waved a hand. "My husband's got some aspirin left from the pharmacy. Do a good job and you'll get a pill." Farah pressed her lips to her son's burning forehead. "One pill for a whole day of work. Your God sees all this," she wanted to say, but bit her tongue. Her God saw it too, and stayed silent. In the evenings, after putting Ramin to sleep, Farah knitted. Her needles moved in the yellow glow of the kerosene lamp, turning unraveled old sweaters into tiny socks, hats, cardigans for children. One sweater meant 5 children's things. 5 children's things meant $2 and a food coupon. A food coupon meant she could make sweet water for her son, so he wouldn't cry from hunger when the milk wasn't enough. Sometimes she thought the clicking needles tapped out the rhythm of an old lullaby her mother once sang to her. "Sleep, Farah, my daughter, sleep, my angel." The memory burned her throat like a sip of strong tea. Since she had left her parents' house with a baby in her arms, her mother hadn't spoken a single word to her. She didn't dare go against her husband's will. When the radio quietly reported the death of yet another president, Farah didn't even lift her head from her knitting. What difference did it make who sat at the top deciding the fates of millions, when her own fate hung on the tip of a knitting needle? After the economic crisis, rumors spread through town about crackdowns on illegal trade, raids on markets. "They say in the next county they arrested 3 women," a neighbor said, dropping by to borrow salt. "They were selling homemade scarves. Took them straight to the station with their kids." Farah silently shoved the half-finished cardigan under her pillow. If they came with an inspection, she'd say it was for her son. If they didn't believe her, no, she didn't want to think about that. The court hearing was set for January 20th, 1982. Farah had filed a suit to establish Jack's paternity and get child support. On the day of the trial, she wore her only decent dress, a dark green one with a white collar, sewn years ago for her school graduation. Now it hung loose. After childbirth and months of malnutrition, her body had thinned into a fragile stem. In the courtroom she saw him, Jack, in a new suit, with a neat haircut. His parents sat beside him, his father in a hat, his mother in a fur coat. The session began. The judge flipped through papers with no expression. Citizen Farah Darwish claims that Citizen Jack Cameron is the father of her son, Ramin Darwish, born February 15, 1980. Her voice sounded like she was reading off a grocery list. Citizen Cameron denies paternity and demands a test. 2-year-old Ramin stirred in Farah's arms, curiously watching the strangers. His eyes landed on Jack. He smiled and stretched out his little hands. "Mister." The room went silent. Farah could feel the stares, curious, judgmental, mocking. Jack turned pale and looked away. His mother covered her mouth with a handkerchief. When it was Farah's turn to speak, she stood, clutching her son tightly. "He is the father," her usually quiet voice rang firm and clear. "I've never known any other man. We loved each other. He promised to marry me when he came back from university. Do you have witnesses to these relations?" The judge raised an eyebrow. "Witnesses?" Farah gave a bitter smile. "The stars over the vineyards. The old abandoned house on the edge of town. His own conscience, if he had one." Then Cameron's lawyer jumped up. "Your Honor, my client is a respected law student, top of his class. And this woman," he sneered in Farah's direction, "has no permanent residence, no official job, and is engaged in speculation." "I sew and knit," Farah flared. "For my child and to survive." "Quiet." The judge tapped her pencil on the desk. Farah froze in the middle of the courtroom. Something was rising inside her, dark, ancient, rooted deep within. She turned to Jack, who was shuffling his papers. "Look at me," she commanded, her voice no longer that of a girl but of an old sorceress. "Look into my eyes, Jack Cameron." He lifted his head and recoiled at the sight of her face, twisted with pain and fury. "May God never give you another child," she said clearly, and somehow everyone understood every word. "Do you hear me? May your family line end here." At that moment the frost-covered window pane cracked with a sharp, frightening sound. Everyone flinched and instinctively stepped back from Farah, as if she were contagious. Terror flashed in Jack's mother's eyes. "She's insane," Jack's father shouted, but his voice wavered. "Get her out of here." Farah turned and walked out of the courtroom, head held high. In that moment she knew justice wouldn't come. She'd have to survive on her own. "Don't worry," a neighbor tried to comfort her. "You're young, you're pretty. You'll get married again." But men weren't lining up to marry a poor immigrant woman with another man's child. She had to find another way to live. The solution came unexpectedly. Among her neighbors was an old man who made alcohol from corn, thick, dark, with character, as he liked to say. One day, when he was bedridden with back pain, Farah brought him an herbal brew her mother had taught her to make. "You've got good hands and a good head, girl," the old man said when the pain eased. "Want me to teach you the trade? It's steady money, just watch out for the cops." That's how a small still appeared in the tiny room, hidden behind a curtain, with barrels of mash tucked under the bed. She masked the smell with bunches of dried mint and thyme hanging in the corners. If an inspection came, she would say she was drying herbs to sell. In 6 months of work, Farah saved enough to buy a crumbling little house on the edge of town, 2 rooms, a rotting floor, a leaky roof. But it was hers. The first night in the new house she cried from happiness, holding sleeping Ramin in her arms. She repaired the house herself, begging scrap wood from the local carpenter, learning how to mix cement, how to swing a hammer. Her hands grew rough with calluses, but every nail driven, every crack plastered was a victory over poverty, over fate, over the men who had betrayed her. One day, a distant relative of the Camerons came to town with news. Jack had married the prosecutor's daughter, rich, educated, with an apartment in San Francisco. The wedding was grand, full of pomp. But happiness didn't last. Within months, the bride faded away. They said it was cancer. And a year later, he married again. But tragedy struck once more, complications late in pregnancy. They noticed too late, and both mother and child died. "They say something's wrong with him," women whispered. "Like a black widower. Or maybe cursed." Farah, walking by with buckets, only gripped the yoke on her shoulders tighter. Cursed. She didn't believe in such things, but something dark and satisfied stirred deep inside her. "Mama, why does everyone else have a dad and I don't?" 4-year-old Ramin asked one night as Farah tucked him in. She froze, not knowing how to answer. She didn't want to lie, but the truth was too heavy. "You do have a dad," she finally said, pulling the blanket snug. "He's just far away. And when will he come back?" The boy's eyes, exactly like Jack's, looked at her with trust and seriousness. Farah stroked his cheek. Suddenly it came to her, she knew what to say. Not a lie, but not the whole truth either. "You know, sweetheart, your real dad is the one who loves you and takes care of you," she kissed his forehead. "And I promise, one day we'll find that man. A true father." Ramin smiled and closed his eyes. A minute later he was asleep, breathing softly like a kitten. Farah sat by his bed for a long time, watching his face in the dim light of the kerosene lamp. She thought about the promise she had just made. A real father. She would have to find such a man, not for herself, but for Ramin. And for that, she needed to be stronger, more independent. Survival wasn't enough anymore, she had to build a life. Outside, the February wind howled, the same wind that had brought her son into the world 4 years earlier. Daughter of the wind, that's what her father had called her in rare moments of tenderness. Now she understood why. The wind can't stop, or it dies. Neither could she. Rain hammered on the roof, finding new holes in the old shingles. Farah slid bowls and pots under the dripping water. Ramin, now 5, busily floated bark boats around them. "Make sure the boats don't sink, son," Farah said, dragging the old mattress away from a spreading wet spot. A knock at the door startled her. Who would visit in weather like this? On the porch stood a stranger, tall, dark-skinned, with striking eyes and gray at his temples despite his youth. Rain streamed off his shoulders, but he smiled a bright, white smile. "Excuse me," he began with a clear accent, "I'm Enrique Vasquez, working on the new school construction. They told me you're renting out a room." Farah hesitated. She really had put up a notice about renting the small room for extra money, but she hadn't expected her first lodger to be someone like him. "You're Mexican?" she asked bluntly, trying to sound stricter than she felt. "Yes," he nodded, shaking water from his jacket. "From San Antonio. I'm the crew foreman. We'll be working here for 3 more months, and the dorms," he made an expressive face. "Crowded. Full of bugs." His eyes lifted to the ceiling, where another wet patch was spreading. "Your roof leaks," he observed with professional interest. "The shingles are cracked. I can fix it, for part of the rent." Enrique fixed more than just the roof. Within a week, the whole house was transformed, leveled floors, patched walls, a new stove pipe. He worked evenings after his shifts, humming Mexican songs. Ramin followed him everywhere, handing him tools and soaking up new words in a language he'd never heard before. "Your son looks like you," Enrique said once, watching Farah cook dinner. Same proud gaze. "Everyone says he's his father's copy," she replied, surprising herself by letting slip the pain she usually buried deep. "No," Enrique shook his head. "Maybe his looks came from his father, I don't know, never saw him. But his soul? That's yours." He said it so simply, so surely, that Farah's heart clenched. In the 6 years since Jack left, no one had spoken to her like that, seeing not just a poor single mother, but a woman with a soul, with pain, with a past. That evening Ramin first called him Uncle Enrique and asked for a story. "I only know Mexican stories," Enrique smiled. "Tell a Mexican one." Farah leaned closer, curious herself. Enrique told them a tale about a mountain lake where a beautiful bird waited for true love. "True love," he said, looking not at Ramin but at Farah, "is when two become one, like a drop of dew and the petal of a flower." On the black and white TV with its forever fuzzy picture, they showed the new governor. The politician spoke of reforms, of new opportunities, of democratization. "Do you think anything will change?" Farah asked, sitting beside Enrique on the worn-out couch. "Up there they always say pretty words," he shrugged. "But does anything change for people like us? For you, a single mother with a child. For me, a Mexican far from home?" There was bitterness in his voice, one she knew all too well. At that moment she understood, he was just as lonely, just as lost in the world, as she was. Their first kiss happened to the sound of a May rain, the same rain that had once carried him into her life. Later, much later, Farah would think that rain had been a sign, pure, washing away the past, but also damp, cold, bringing sickness. They married in early summer of 1985. Not modestly, but lavishly, a fusion of two old traditions. Enrique insisted his family's elders come, old men in traditional dress. They prayed, blessed the couple, showered them with rice and coins. Fatima came secretly, while Ahmed was away in the next town. She hugged her daughter, cried, and handed her a bundle with a dowry, an old grandmother's brooch and embroidered blankets. "My daughter," she whispered, looking at Farah in her wedding dress. "May the Lord give you happiness this time." Farah glowed. For the first time in years she felt like more than just a mother, more than just someone surviving day to day. She felt like a woman, loved, desired, with a future ahead. Ramin, dressed in his little new suit, proudly called Enrique Papa. At the table, with traditional food and music playing, Farah caught herself thinking, here it is, the promise to her son coming true. A real father. A real family. "Will you come with me to Mexico now?" Enrique asked when the guests had left. "I want to show you my mountains." She nodded without a second thought. In that moment she would have followed him to the ends of the earth. The mountains greeted them with their majesty and silence. Mexico City dazzled Farah with its colorful markets, the smell of spices, the loud voices. But the real shock came later, the mountain village where Enrique's family lived. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Enrique pointed to the snow-capped peaks towering over the adobe houses. "These mountains have stood for thousands of years. And so have our traditions." There was a new note in his voice, pride, edged with authority. Farah pushed the thought aside. He was just emotional, coming home. Enrique's family lived in a large courtyard, several houses joined by one wall. His mother, a frail old woman with a sharp gaze, his father, a stately man with a staff, many brothers, their wives, and children of every age. "This is my family," Enrique said with pride. "Now it's yours too." That very first evening Farah understood what those words meant. Women ate separately from the men, sitting on the floor in the far corner. They were only allowed to whisper. After dinner the eldest sister-in-law pointed her toward the kitchen, to wash dishes for everyone. "He didn't warn you?" a slim girl with intelligent eyes asked, helping her with the mountain of plates. "I'm Carmen, Enrique's sister. I studied philology in Los Angeles. The only one in our family who got an education." "Warn me about what?" Farah asked. Carmen only sighed. "About how women live here." The honeymoon turned into months of life in the village. Enrique always found a reason to delay leaving. A mountain pass blocked by rain, his mother's illness needing care, better work here than in the city. "We agreed to go back," Farah reminded him. "Ramin has to start school soon." "There's a school here too," Enrique cut her off. "And it'll do him good to grow up among real men." Ramin adapted quickly. He picked up the local language almost without an accent, played with the village boys, tanned under the mountain sun. But often Farah caught him staring off into the distance, past the mountains, toward the life they had left behind. Enrique was changing before her eyes. Tenderness gave way to demands, then to dominance, then to cruelty. In public he boasted about his beautiful wife. At home he scolded her for the smallest mistakes. Farah watched in horror as the kind, caring man she loved turned into a tyrant, someone strange and frightening. "It's the mountains," Carmen whispered, "the only ally she had in this foreign world. They change men, make them as hard as stone." The village radio caught only one local station. News from the bigger world reached them in fragments from rare visitors. Political shifts, new ideas, all of it stayed beyond the mountain ridges, while life in the village stood still, as if centuries had never passed. Pregnancy became both joy and nightmare for Farah. Joy, because a new life was growing inside her. Nightmare, because there were no doctors in the village, no hospital, only an old midwife with herbs and incantations. "I want to give birth in the city," she told Enrique, stroking her swelling belly. "There's a maternity ward there. My mother gave birth to 8 children right here, in this house." He cut her off. "And so will you." Ramin watched his mother with worry. He became her shadow, her little protector, despite his young age. When Enrique raised his voice, the boy would step between them, looking at his stepfather with a seriousness far beyond his years. Labor began on a rainy night in April 1986. Farah screamed so loud it seemed the mountains themselves trembled. The old midwife whispered prayers, rubbed her belly with bitter herbs, but something was wrong. The baby wouldn't come. "She's dying," Farah heard through the haze of pain. "Too much blood." "She can't die," Enrique's voice reached her as if from far away. "She's the mother of my son." The last thing Farah remembered before slipping into darkness was the smell of mountain herbs and the feeling of hands lifting her body, weightless from blood loss. She woke up in a hospital 100 miles from the village. Over her leaned the face of an older doctor with tired eyes. "You'll live," he said. "You're lucky they got you here in time." "The baby?" Farah whispered with cracked lips. "A boy," the doctor nodded. "Strong, against all odds. Now that's a real fighter." Later, Farah learned it was Carmen who insisted on taking her to the hospital, practically stealing her away once it became clear the birth had gone wrong. She had risked everything, her place in the family, maybe even her life. "You're the sister I never had," Farah told her when she could finally speak. Carmen only shrugged. "Women have to stand together, especially here, in the mountains." The newborn was named Eunice, after Farah's maternal grandfather. Enrique didn't object. He was so thrilled at having a son of his own blood that he even forgave the trip to the hospital. "Now you're a true Mexican wife," he said, looking at the little bundle in her arms. "You've given me a son." And in his eyes Farah saw what she feared most. Now she belonged to him completely, like the mountains, the house, the air he breathed. The thought of escape grew in her slowly, silently. At first it was just daydreams, then plans, and finally, resolve. Carmen helped however she could, gathering information about trains, hiding money from the family funds, finding documents. The first attempt failed. Enrique noticed the packed bags, and the punishment was cruel. Not beatings, he never lowered himself to that. Worse, he took Ramin to the mountains, to the shepherds, and didn't bring him back for a week. "Next time," he said, staring into her eyes, "the boy stays in the mountains for good. And you'll leave alone, without the children. Choose." Farah chose obedience, outward, for show. Inside, her determination grew, like a mountain river carving stone until it breaks through. The second attempt was carefully planned. Carmen arranged for Farah and the children to be sent to the city for shopping. At the market, a truck driver Carmen knew would meet them and take them to the train station. But at the last moment it fell apart. Enrique came home early and caught them preparing. This time the punishment was worse. He locked Farah in the shed for 3 days, no food, only water, letting her see the children for just 1 hour a day. "When you understand that your place is here, with your husband," he said through the locked door, "then you'll come out." On the 3rd day, Farah stepped out on shaky legs, head bowed, the picture of humility and submission. Enrique basked in triumph, his family nodded in approval. The rebellious wife had finally learned her place. The fire started suddenly. The kitchen curtain caught first, then the wooden beams, then the roof. Everyone ran into the yard, grabbing whatever they could save. Farah held 1-year-old Eunice, while Ramin clung tightly to her skirt. "My documents are still inside," she cried, pointing to the burning annex where their room was. "I have to get them." No one noticed when she ran not into the flames but toward the side gate that led into the mountains. Carmen was waiting there with a bag packed with food, money, and warm clothes. "Take this trail," Carmen whispered, hugging her quickly. "Over the pass. You'll find a village. Ask for Rodriguez. He'll take you to the station." "Come with me," Farah begged. "You don't want to stay here." Carmen shook her head. "I can't. Someone has to distract them when they realize you're gone. I'll say I saw you run back into the house for your things. They'll punish you. I'll survive." Carmen kissed little Eunice on the forehead. "But you won't, if you stay. Run, sister. Run and don't look back." The mountain path wound between boulders, climbing higher and higher. Farah carried Eunice in a sling on her chest, gripping Ramin's hand tightly. The boy didn't cry, didn't complain, as if he knew their survival depended on his strength. When they reached the pass, Farah turned one last time. Down in the village, torchlights flickered. They were searching. Flames on Enrique's house had already died down, leaving only smoke glowing red. Somewhere down there was Carmen, the only true sister fate had given her. "Where are we going, Mama?" Ramin asked, his face solemn beyond his years. "Home," Farah said, clutching her sons to her. "We're going home." From the past the valley opened wide before them, endless, stretching to the horizon. The rising sun painted the snowy peaks pink, like pomegranate seeds bursting open. The northern wind pushed the clouds aside, clearing their path. Daughter of the wind, that's what her father used to call her. And now she felt it again, the wind carrying her forward, back to her roots, back to her strength. With her two sons in her arms, she was starting a new chapter of her life, the third one. How many more still waited ahead? The economic crisis still hung in the air when Farah stepped onto the platform of her hometown. The news spoke of recovery, new jobs, rebuilding. But people whispered about the real aftermath, families losing homes, towns drowning in debt. The world was falling apart, but Farah wasn't afraid. Her own world had already shattered and been rebuilt so many times that another catastrophe felt like nothing more than background noise to her personal battle. She wore a worn coat bought with her last money at a thrift shop. Ramin, 8 years old and far too serious for his age, held her hand tightly. 1-year-old Eunice slept in a homemade sling against her chest. "Hey, look, Farah's back," someone shouted on the street. She flinched, bracing for mockery, for contempt, the same thing she'd left behind. But instead, an elderly neighbor who once condemned her for having a child out of wedlock came up quietly and handed her a bag of apples. "Thank you, Mrs. Moore," Farah whispered, fighting back tears. "Come with me," the woman said simply. "You can stay the night. We'll figure out the rest later." By evening, Mrs. Moore's house was filled with women bringing whatever they could, canned food, old children's clothes, a bit of grain. Times were hard with crisis, unemployment, but for the woman who had escaped a tyrant, there was food, kindness, and words of support. "Why'd you go so far away, child?" they asked, glancing at Eunice. "All the way into the mountains, they say." Farah told little, avoiding details, but the women understood without words. They saw the fading bruises, noticed how she flinched at loud noises, how tightly she held her younger son. "You'll go home, won't you, Mrs. Moore asked carefully. "To your parents?" Farah shook her head. Her father would never forgive her, and her mother wouldn't dare let her in, afraid of his anger. "He won't forgive his own daughter?" The woman sighed. "But you're still his blood." Still, Farah found herself at her family's gate. Ahmed was just coming back from work when he saw her standing there with 2 children. Their eyes met. She saw in his a storm of emotions, anger, shame, pain, but also relief. The next moment he clutched his chest and collapsed without a sound. "Papa," she whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. "My father." The doctors said it was a massive heart attack, instant death. Fatima, frozen in grief, didn't cry. She only stared at her daughter with hollow eyes, as if seeing a ghost. "It's my fault," Farah said that night, when the two of them sat alone in the heavy silence of the house. "If I hadn't come." "Don't be foolish," her mother interrupted, breaking her silence for the first time that day. "He was waiting for you. Every day he stood by the window, watching the road. Only his pride kept him from admitting it." After the funeral, they stayed in the family home, Farah, her 2 sons, and grief-stricken Fatima. Slowly, life began to settle. Farah found work in a bakery. Ramin went to school. Fatima cared for little Eunice, singing him the same old lullabies she had once sung to Farah. But peace never came to Farah's heart. She felt trapped, like she had once before, only now with 2 children in her arms. The same sideways glances, the same whispers behind her back. "That's the one who ran from her tyrant. Had 2 bastards, and now she's back." She spotted the announcement by chance on the town hall wall. Workers wanted for logging in Oregon. Housing provided. Piecework pay. Are you out of your mind? Fatima exclaimed when Farah told her she was going. With 2 children? Into the forests? Winters are bitter there. But we'll have a roof over our heads and bread on the table, Farah replied. And no one there knows my story. I'll start fresh. Deep down, she knew it wasn't just about bread. She was still driven by that same untamed hunger for freedom, for horizons. She was the daughter of the wind. She couldn't grow roots where her soul couldn't breathe. The Oregon forests greeted them with stern beauty, endless seas of firs, cold lakes, ringing silence. The logging site was miles from the nearest town, just a few workers' barracks, an office, a mess hall, a supply shed. They were given a room in one of the barracks, clean, warm, with a stove and iron beds. Farah took a job as a cook's helper in the mess hall, sometimes sorting timber for extra pay. That's where she met Andrew Brooks, a young forestry worker, fresh out of college, sent there on a work program. Tall, fair-haired, with open gray eyes and an easy smile, he stood out among the grim-faced loggers. "Need a hand?" he asked, seeing her struggling with a bundle of firewood while keeping an eye on Eunice playing nearby. "I've got it," she answered sharply, her years of hardship having built up a protective armor. But he helped anyway, silently carrying the wood to the barack, splitting another pile, stacking it neatly by the porch. "Don't worry, I'm not trying to intrude," he said when he caught her wary look. "I just know how hard it is raising kids alone." "How would you know?" Slipped out before she could stop herself. "My mother raised 3 of us," he said simply. "My father died in a logging accident when I was 7. I'm the oldest." That evening they talked until midnight, about childhood, about dreams that never came true, about books they loved. Not once did he ask why she was alone, who the fathers of her children were. To him, it didn't seem to matter. Their closeness grew slowly, steadily, like a forest flower opening day by day, turning toward the sun. Andrew would bring handmade wooden toys for the boys, pine branches with cones instead of flowers for Farah. She smiled as she accepted the gifts, and something inside her began to melt, the ice of mistrust, the fear of being wrong again, of falling under someone else's control. Andrew loved her children, not trying to replace their father, but becoming a friend, a mentor. Ramin, wary at first, slowly warmed to him, watching how this big man with calloused hands patiently taught him to tell tree species apart, to read animal tracks, to start a fire with a single match. "He's a good man," the boy said one day when they were alone. "Better than him." Farah understood. Her son didn't want to say Enrique's name, as if afraid it might summon his ghost into their new life. "Yes, he is," she agreed, putting her arm around him. "But remember, son, we're always responsible for ourselves. Always." Their wedding was simple. They signed papers at the town hall of a nearby settlement and celebrated with a few friends. Andrew insisted that Eunice and Ramin be there too. "This is our family now," he said plainly. A new life began. For the first time in years, Farah felt not just relief from suffering, but real happiness. Andrew helped her enroll in forestry technician courses. The work was tough but fascinating. She went on field inspections with him, learning to spot tree diseases, plan cuttings, and manage plantings. The children grew up among fir trees and lakes, sunburned, strong, like young shoots. Eunice, now 3, forgot Mexico, though he carried his father's dark skin and eyes. Ramin, in 4th grade, studied at a boarding school in town and came home on weekends. "Mama, I'm happy," he whispered at night, hugging her. In August 1991, the world turned upside down again. They sat by the radio, listening to news of economic collapse, company bankruptcies, worker protests. "What's going to happen now?" Farah asked, clutching her children close. "I don't know," Andrew admitted honestly. "But whatever it is, we'll get through it. Together." She wanted to believe him, wanted it with all her heart. But something deep inside, that survival instinct sharpened by years of struggle, told her the storm was only beginning. The crisis hit the logging site just like everywhere else: delayed wages, layoffs, supply shortages. Dozens were fired, companies folded one after another. "We just have to hold on until things improve," Andrew said, but in his eyes Farah more and more often saw confusion. "It's temporary." She nodded silently, but worked twice as hard, cleaning offices, sewing for extra money, gathering and drying mushrooms and berries to sell. The memory of hungry years with little Ramin was still too fresh. She couldn't let her children starve again. Andrew lasted longer than most. He was a valuable specialist, kept on even after mass layoffs. But when his wages were delayed for the third month, something in him cracked. The first bottle he brought home was medicine, to keep warm, he said. Then came the second, the third. Please, don't, Farah begged, seeing his eyes grow cloudy, his hands shaking in the mornings. The kids see you. And what do I give them? He shot back bitterly. I can't even feed you. What kind of man does that make me? She tried to convince him that money wasn't everything, that they would survive, that together they were stronger than any hardship. But alcohol pulled him down like a swamp, deeper every day. When Ramin turned 13 and Eunice 6, Andrew lost his job for good, the company shut down, its assets sold off for debt. They lived on Farah's forestry paycheck, but even that was delayed for months. I can't do this anymore, Andrew said one evening, stumbling home drunk and angry. I can't keep feeding someone else's kids when I can't have my own. You had yours with who knows who, but with me you refuse. Those words hit Farah harder than any slap. In 4 years of marriage, she had never heard him say anything like that. Ramin, standing in the doorway, froze, his face turned to stone. Come on, Eunice, he said quietly, leading his little brother to their room. You don't know what you're saying, Farah tried to keep calm. You're drunk. That's exactly why I know, Andrew shouted, slamming his fist on the table. Look at us. You're my husband, she said, stepping closer, trying to hug him. We're family. He shoved her away, for the first time raising a hand to her. Farah flew back against the wall, hitting her head. Darkness clouded her eyes, but through the haze she saw Andrew's face change, shock, regret, horror. I'm sorry, he whispered, sinking to his knees. I didn't mean to. I don't know what came over me. Her forgiveness lasted a month. Then came more relapses, more promises, more guilt. Farah stayed for the children, for their shared home, for the man she still loved beneath the layers of pain and disappointment. The final break came on a freezing February night in 1992. Andrew staggered and past midnight, reeking of vodka, cheap perfume, and another woman's house. He had spent the evening with the shopkeeper, everyone in the settlement knew. Get out, Farah said, her voice calm. Right now. This is my house, he tried to play righteous, but it rang hollow. No, she shook her head. It's company housing. On my lease. Something wild flashed in his eyes. He looked around, grabbed the axe from the woodpile shelf. You, throwing me out? He rasped, raising it. Me? Farah stepped back, but too late. The blade slashed her jacket sleeve, cutting into her shoulder. Pain burned like fire, blood running down her arm. Mama! Ramin's scream cut through the room. The boy, jolted awake by the noise, stood in the doorway. What happened next Farah remembered only in fragments, screams, a struggle, Ramin pulling Andrew away, a howl that sounded half human, half animal. A blow, then darkness. She woke in a hospital, white ceiling, the sharp smell of antiseptic, and 4 hanging above her. Beside the bed sat Ramin, his eyes red from crying, holding little Eunice's frightened hand. What? Her throat wouldn't obey, her tongue felt heavy and strange. Concussion, shoulder wound, bruises, the doctor listed, leaning over her. It could have been worse. Your son called for help in time. Andrew? In jail, Ramin said with a hardness far beyond his age. They took him. Farah closed her eyes. Pain throbbed in her temples, but through it came one clear thought, never again. Never again would she depend on a man, on his moods, his problems, his demons. Enough. It was time to learn how to live differently. Mama, Ramin leaned close, his eyes filled with both worry and resolve. We'll leave this place. Start over? Start over. At 13, he already knew the pattern of their life, constant movement, the search for a better place, the endless cycle of running and returning to themselves. Yes, my son, she whispered, squeezing his hand. We'll start over, but this time differently. Outside the hospital window, snow swirled, big flakes settling on fir trees, frozen lakes, rooftops where other people's lives glowed faintly. The northern wind, sharp and clean, pushed the clouds south, clearing a path for them into a new life. The sun hadn't yet touched the horizon, but downtown Los Angeles market was already buzzing like a disturbed hive. Thousands of people, teachers and engineers yesterday, vendors today, spread out among endless rows of shipping containers and stalls. The city shouted in 1,000 voices at once, hawkers, sellers, buyers, guards, taxi drivers, loaders. Dozens of languages overlapped, English, Spanish, Korean, Arabic, Chinese, a Babylon of despair and hope. Farah stood behind her makeshift stall, a folding table covered with plastic. On it, neat stacks of clothes, t-shirts, tank tops, tracksuits. The wind tugged at her faded scarf, hiding the copper hair that was the last trace of her old beauty. Her hands, rough from hauling bags, automatically adjusted the merchandise. Her eyes followed the crowd. Her lips whispered soundlessly, "Come, cheap prices, good quality." Beside her stood a woman in a worn jacket, a former music teacher, now selling Chinese trinkets. They had met on the bus from San Francisco to Los Angeles, crammed between oversized bags. "How's it today?" Linda asked, nodding at Farah's table. "Sold 2 tracksuits this morning," Farah answered. "And you?" "Nothing," Linda sighed. They fell silent, watching the stream of cautious shoppers with wary eyes. "How are the kids?" Linda asked when the flow slowed. Farah bit her lip. She didn't want to talk about it, but the weight on her heart demanded release. "A letter came," she finally said. "Ramin wrote it himself. Eunice is sick a lot, he says. Cough, fever. Your mother's with them?" "Yes. But it's hard for her. She's 60 now, not the same anymore." Linda nodded knowingly. Her own teenage daughter stayed home alone while she sold at the market. "What can we do?" Farah spread her hands, answering an unspoken question. "There's no work back home. The factories are shut. Either come here or starve." There was no complaint in her voice. She had long since learned to take life as it was, without illusions or regrets. But deep inside, beneath the armor of forced resilience, her mother's heart ached. By evening the market quieted. Farah packed up the unsold clothes, counted the day's earnings, set aside money for the next purchase. She slept at the bus station, in the waiting hall, clutching her bag of cash. She had a ticket for the day after tomorrow, to another city where she would buy a new batch of goods and return to the stall again. In the dim station lights she pulled out a worn notebook, her accounting book. With neat handwriting she recorded income, expenses, balance. The neighbor's debt for bread and milk for the kids. Rent for her spot at the market. A bribe for customs officers. Money for new goods. The numbers painted a grim picture. To make ends meet, she needed more trips, more stock, to sell in several places at once. But how? She was alone, her body worn down, her back aching from the weight of heavy bags. Farah closed the notebook and leaned against the cold wall. Sleep wouldn't come, though her body begged for rest. In her mind she saw the faces of her sons, Ramin, already 14, too serious for his years, carrying the weight of home, and his little brother, Eunice, fragile and quiet, with eyes that had seen too much for a child. "Lord, help me," she whispered, an old prayer surfacing from childhood, when the world still seemed whole and understandable. The idea came suddenly, as she watched loaders unloading a truck of goods. What if she didn't have to haul everything herself? What if she found helpers, people who would sell her goods for a share of the profit? Her first hired seller was Marina, a young woman with a baby in her arms, whose husband had gone off to work and never returned. Farah gave her part of the stock, explained what to sell and how, and agreed on a percentage. Within a month she already had 3 women selling for her in different corners of the market. 2 months later she rented a small container to store goods so she didn't have to carry everything herself. By the end of 1993, Farah had shifted from retail to small-scale wholesale, buying large lots and selling them in smaller batches to other vendors. Business was picking up, relatively speaking, in the middle of the crisis, but now she could send more money home, sometimes even packages with clothes and sweets for her children. Every 3 months she carved out a week to go back, hug her sons, talk with her mother, see with her own eyes how they were living. Those short visits were both joy and torment. Joy, because she saw her boys growing, Ramin turning into a young man, Eunice, sickly but eager to learn. Torment, because each time leaving them behind was harder, watching their eyes follow the departing bus. "You're practically a businesswoman now," Fatima said once, watching her daughter spread banknotes across the table. "Aren't you afraid?" "Afraid of what?" Farah shrugged. "Everything," her mother sighed. "These are dangerous times. Bandits, robberies. Every day on TV, someone shot, something blown up." Farah just waved her off. She didn't believe trouble could reach her. She was too small a player. Who would care about her? It happened on the Los Angeles-San Diego highway on a damp November day in 1994. The bus carrying Farah and a month's earnings was stopped on a deserted stretch by masked men. Everyone stayed put. One barked as he boarded. "Document check." They took everything: money, papers, watches, gold jewelry. From Farah they ripped away the bag with her month's earnings, everything she had to reinvest in goods and send to her children. "Please," she grabbed one man's sleeve, forgetting caution. That's all my money. My children need it. The blow from a pistol but threw her back into her seat. Darkness swam before her eyes. The taste of blood filled her mouth. Shut up, the masked man hissed. Be grateful you're still alive. When the bus finally rolled into San Diego, Farah couldn't cry or speak. She moved like an automaton, got off, walked to the familiar apartment where she usually stayed with other traders. Bandits? The landlady asked, seeing her battered face and empty eyes. Lie down, rest. Morning will be wiser than evening. But morning brought no wisdom, only despair. Everything she'd built over the years collapsed in an instant. Creditors wouldn't wait, suppliers wouldn't grant delays. She hadn't just lost money, she'd lost the business that fed her children. That day she drank for the first time in years, cheap tequila until she blacked out, until she vomited, until memory itself abandoned her. She woke on the hallway floor, lying in filth, her head splitting, her soul so empty even pain couldn't get inside. You've gone and done it, the landlady muttered, helping her up. Here, drink this, it'll ease you. Farah shoved away the cloudy liquid. No, she croaked through cracked lips. Enough. She wandered outside, not knowing where to go. Her feet carried her to a small church on the edge of the district, not Catholic, not Protestant, some interdenominational place with a plain wooden cross on the door. Inside it was quiet and empty. Farah sat on a bench in the far corner. She didn't pray, she didn't even know how, or to whom. She just sat, staring at the bare walls, the worn Bible on the lectern, the beam of light through a small window. Hard, isn't it? A gentle voice came from beside her. An elderly man in simple clothes, kind eyes under a gray beard, sat down next to her. Hard, Farah echoed, seeing no point in denying it. Tell me, he said softly, without pressure. And she did. All of it, from the children with their grandmother, to her trading trips, to the little business she had grown, to the roadside robbery, to her fear of going home empty-handed. I can't even scrape enough for a ticket back, she finished, clutching her worn wallet. And my kids are waiting, my mother is sick. The man was silent, staring at something beyond the church walls. Then he said, You know why birds aren't afraid the branch will break under them? Why? Farah asked mechanically. Because they trust not the branch, but their own wings. He smiled, and in that smile she saw something of her father, not the harsh Ahmed of later years, but the man who once held her on his lap and called her daughter of the wind. She didn't return home empty-handed. No, she didn't accept charity from the church, her pride wouldn't allow it. But something shifted inside her after that conversation. She remembered who she was, Farah Darwish, daughter of immigrants who survived deportation and hunger. Not breaking, not giving up, always finding a way, that was in her blood. Farah started again, with a loan from former competitors who had now become partners. A small batch of goods, more trading trips, more long nights in bus stations. But this time she was wiser. She never carried all the money herself, she sent it in small sums with trusted people. She insured the goods, as much as was possible in those chaotic times. Little by little, business picked up again. By 1996 she had built a modest trading network, stalls in several cities, a warehouse in Los Angeles, a team of sellers. She switched to building materials. A construction boom was sweeping the country, newly rich families were raising mansions, offices, shops. Farah rented a room in a Los Angeles apartment, a real one, with a bed and a table. She lived between Los Angeles, Phoenix, and Boston. Trips home became rarer. There was too much to do, competition was growing, if you blinked, your place was already taken. One evening, coming back from another round of negotiations, she found a letter in her mailbox, just a folded notebook sheet inside a plain envelope, written in a child's careful hand. Mama, when are you coming? We miss you. Grandma is sick, I skip school to take care of her. Eunice is sick a lot too, coughing at night. I give him the medicine you left, but it's almost gone. The house is cold, the fireplace smokes, I tried to fix it but I couldn't. Please come, at least for a few days. We're waiting. Ramin and Eunice. Farah didn't know how long she sat over that letter, reading it again and again. Tears fell on the page, blurring the handwriting, so neat, so careful. Ramin had always been a diligent student, no matter what. On the table beside her lay her planner, crammed with meetings, contracts, deals. The next trip home wasn't scheduled for another month. Too many important things, too many commitments to push aside. She took a pen and crossed out the entire week ahead. Across the page she wrote in big letters, home. Home was worse than she imagined. Fatima, thin and hollow-eyed, lay under a pile of blankets. The fireplace really did smoke, The house was damp and cold. Ramin, taller than the last time she'd seen him, moved around like a little old man, methodical, frugal, practiced in adult tasks. Yunus, pale with shadows under his eyes, coughed a dry, racking cough. "Why didn't you write sooner?" Farah asked, pain in her voice as she repaired the stove with her practiced hands. "We didn't want to distract you," Ramin answered, helping her with dinner. "You're working. For us." There was no reproach in his tone. And suddenly she heard herself in his words, herself, the woman she had become over the years, someone who accepted life as it was, without illusions or complaints. When had her son grown into that? That night, after putting the boys to bed, Farah sat in the kitchen in front of the TV. The news showed an orphanage, children left behind in hard times, living inside strange walls. Thin faces, adult eyes, rehearsed lines. "My mom went away to earn money. She'll come back. She has to come back." Farah switched off the TV with a trembling hand. In the dark kitchen, a sharp truth struck her. She had made her own children orphans. Not legally, not formally. She hadn't abandoned them to an institution. She had sent money, clothes. But in essence, how different was her motherhood from absence? Ramin, forced to grow up too early. Yunus, who didn't know what it meant to be tucked in by his mother every night, only every few months. Fatima, living out her last years in silence, burdened with more than her strength allowed. Farah stepped outside into the cool spring night. The sky was scattered with stars, the same stars above the vineyards where she and Jack once dreamed of the future. The same stars above the mountains of Mexico, from which she had fled with her children. The same stars above the fir forests, where she had found and lost a fleeting happiness. What am I doing? The question pulsed through her mind. What is all this for? For money? For business? For some illusion of safety in the future? But the future was already here, and her son washing his grandmother's sheets, and the cough of her younger boy awake at night, and her mother's wrinkles as she carried her cross without complaint. Farah lifted her eyes to the stars. The wind, the same northern wind that had always followed her, tugged at the strands of hair slipping from her scarf. Daughter of the wind, that's what her father had called her. But even the wind has a home, a place it returns to, carrying change. "I will come back," she whispered into the night. And it wasn't a promise to her children or her mother. It was a promise to herself, to return to what truly mattered, to what gave meaning beyond all the money, all the empires, all the success. To home, to family, to her real self. Concrete dust settled on her hair despite the safety helmet. Farah squinted at the blueprints spread across an improvised table of empty cement sacks. Around her, the construction site roared, excavators growled, workers shouted, hammers thudded, saws screeched. A symphony of building, a new anthem for a country clawing out of economic collapse. "We need reinforcement here," she circled a spot on the plans with her fingernail. "The foundation is sinking. We'll need extra support." The foreman, a former engineer, now a hands-on builder, nodded respectfully. He had long stopped being surprised that a woman in construction could grasp structural details better than many men. "But Farah, the costs will go up," he said carefully. "They will," she nodded. "But better to add a couple of zeros now than deal with cracks later. Clear it with the client. Tell them I insist." Her voice carried no hesitation. In 5 years of trade, Farah hadn't just survived, she had learned. She studied markets, laws, contracts. From clothing she had moved into construction materials, then construction services. When Los Angeles' building boom hit, she was in the right place at the right time, with the right experience and connections. Now she had her own company, small, but growing. 5 crews specializing in finishing and reconstruction. An office, 2 rooms in an industrial district, but hers, not rented. And most importantly, she had brought her sons and her mother to Los Angeles, renting an apartment in the suburbs and enrolling the boys in school. "It will work out," she told her mother whenever Fatima worried about the future. "We made it. From here, it's only up." Fatima only shook her head. Life had taught her too many times that every rise is followed by a fall. But she stayed silent, unwilling to darken the rare light of her daughter's optimism. Omar Rashid appeared on the horizon in the summer of 1997 at a construction expo, where Farah was searching for new suppliers and clients. Tall, dark-skinned, with streaks of gray in his neatly trimmed beard and sharp, thoughtful eyes. He represented a Turkish construction company looking for partners in the U.S. "You've built an impressive portfolio for such a young firm," he said after her presentation, where Farah showcased her projects. "You're surprised a woman can handle the construction business?" She lifted an eyebrow, ready to defend herself. No, he smiled, little lines forming around his eyes. I'm surprised anyone can handle the construction business here. Man or woman? She laughed, appreciating the joke. That's how the partnership began, slowly growing into something more. Omar brought international experience, connections with foreign investors, knowledge of advanced technologies. Farah brought an understanding of local realities, the skill to navigate between official rules and the unwritten laws of the market. They worked late, often sharing dinner while discussing projects. She caught herself choosing clothes carefully before their meetings, thinking of him when he wasn't around. But she kept her distance, too many scars from past relationships, too high a price for mistakes. At home, she was barely present, leaving at dawn, returning past midnight. Ramin, now 17, and Eunice, 11, had learned to manage without her. Fatima cooked, washed, checked homework. Farah brought money, gifts, opportunities, but not warmth, not presence, not what her children needed most. In August 1998, the world shook again. A financial crisis, markets collapsing, companies going bankrupt. Farah sat in her tiny office, staring at the TV as the news ticker scrolled about the banking system's collapse. All her savings, everything she had built over years of hard work, had turned to dust. You know, in Turkey this has happened 3 times in my lifetime, Omar said, walking in without knocking. He often did that, as if he knew when she needed someone beside her. I have nothing left. It's all gone, Farah answered flatly. Not all. He sat across from her, looking straight into her eyes. You still have the most important things, experience, your name in the market, your team, and me. He handed her a folder. What's this? A contract for the reconstruction of an office center. The client's a Swiss firm. 2-year project. Why are you giving this to me? She flipped through the papers, not believing her eyes. The contract was worth more than everything she'd earned in the last 3 years combined. Because you're the best subcontractor I know, he shrugged, like it was obvious. And because I believe in you, in us. She looked up, her eyes full of gratitude but also caution. No one had offered her help without strings attached in a very long time. I need to think, she said, closing the folder. Of course, he nodded, standing. But not too long. In times like these, opportunities don't wait. They signed the contract a week later. Work exploded, and while the crisis crushed many, for them it turned into a gold mine. Suppliers desperate for orders dropped prices. Laid-off workers were ready to accept less. Competitors without foreign contracts fell out of the race. The company grew. By spring 1999, Farah had 15 crews working across the city. The office moved into a prestigious building. She traded her worn jeans and work boots for business suits, learned the language of big contracts and international standards. Her relationship with Omar grew alongside the business. First tentative touches, then stolen kisses, and finally, the full merging of bodies and souls in hotel rooms after long meetings. He was both tender and passionate, able to read her desires, to anticipate her needs. With him, she felt not just like a business partner or lover, but like a woman, wanted, valued, special. You're my lucky charm, he whispered, kissing the freckles on her shoulder. My fiery goddess of fortune. She stayed quiet, never good at putting feelings into words. But inside, something long dormant bloomed. Hope? Happiness? Love? She was afraid to name it, even in her own mind. The first clash with crime came in February 2000. She and Omar were driving back from a meeting when a black SUV cut them off. 2 burly men in leather jackets dragged them out, shoved them into another car, and took them to some warehouse. You're working on our territory, said a man in an expensive suit, sitting at a desk. And on this territory, you pay. We pay taxes, Omar answered calmly. We work legally. A rifle butt slammed into his ribs, making him double over. Farah lunged toward him, but they held her back. Taxes are for the government, the man in the suit laughed. To us, you pay a cut, 15% of your contracts. Or you don't work. At all. She met his eyes, cold, fish-like, without a trace of doubt or mercy. She had seen eyes like that before, at the markets, in the Mexican village, in the forests. No matter how the scenery changed, predators stayed predators. We need time, she said evenly, to consider the terms. 3 days, the man in the suit nodded. After that, either the money, or he dragged a finger across his throat. They were dumped out of the car somewhere on the city's edge, in the damp February night. Omar could barely stand, 2 ribs broken, his face covered in blood. He needs a doctor, Farah said, holding him up. But not a hospital. Too many questions there. I know someone, Omar rasped. Dr. Salem. From Lebanon. He treats people like us. No paperwork. Dr. Salem turned out to be a lean man in his 40s with intelligent eyes and a sad smile. His clinic was just an apartment on the outskirts of the city, spotlessly clean, fully equipped, no questions asked. 2 ribs broken, but the lungs are fine, he said after examining Omar. You're lucky. How much do we owe you? Farah asked, already pulling out her wallet. Instead of answering, the doctor studied her closely. You're in construction, aren't you? I have a proposal. I've long wanted to open a proper clinic. Legal, but for special clients. I need a partner who knows construction, permits, paperwork, and protection, Omar added, wincing from the pain. You'll need protection. That too, Salem nodded. And I can help with your problem. I have connections. I treat many important people. That's how the Strange Alliance was born, a construction company, a Turkish investor, and a Lebanese doctor with a shadowy past and deep ties in the underworld. Salem brokered the negotiations with the gangsters, cutting the tax down to a manageable 5%. In return, he got a stake in the business and the chance to open his clinic under their wing. I never thought I'd end up working with people like this, Farah admitted to Omar when they were alone. This country plays by different rules now, he answered, carefully wrapping his good arm around her. We adapt to survive. Later, when we're stronger, we can change things. She nodded, but inside something recoiled. Every deal with her conscience had a cost. She had already paid with years away from her children. How much more would she have to give? One evening, coming home earlier than usual, Farah found her sons busy with something odd. Ramin, now 18, was sketching on paper while 12-year-old Yunus scribbled notes beside him. What's this? She asked, stepping closer. Ramin jumped and quickly covered the drawing, but Yunus, not noticing her yet, answered, We're designing a house. The one we'll all live in together. A house? She peeked over her older son's shoulder. On the paper was a sketch of a small villa with a terrace, a garden, a garage. It's beautiful. It's just nonsense, Ramin muttered, folding the sheet. Kid stuff. But his voice carried so much bitterness it pierced her heart. She understood, this wasn't just a fantasy of walls and windows. It was their longing for family, for roots, for the stability they had never known. It's not nonsense, she said softly. Everyone should dream of their own home. Even if they're never at home? Ramin shot back, then bit his lip, as if regretting the words. Farah stayed silent, unsure what to say. What could she tell them? That she worked day and night for their future? That she wanted to give them what she never had? That she was terrified of poverty, of dependence, of humiliation? Words felt empty when all they saw was her absence. Her first real home came in the spring of 2001, a 3-bedroom apartment in a new Santa Monica building. Not luxury, but a clean lobby, a concierge, a playground outside. Here, she said, handing her sons the keys as they stepped into the freshly painted, empty apartment. This is our home. For real. Forever. Yunus ran through the rooms, thrilled, picking out his bedroom. Ramin stood quietly, running his hand along the smooth wall. Thanks, he said at last. But a house isn't just walls. She didn't reply, afraid her voice would break. He was right. A home wasn't walls, or keys, or deeds. It was where people waited for you, where you could be yourself, where everyone sat together at the table every night, not just once a week when their mother remembered her family duties. That summer, Omar proposed, not kneeling, no ring, no romance. Just over dinner, he said he wanted them to be official. I'm not sure, Farah said, putting down her fork. The kids are only starting to adjust, and the business takes all my time. Which is exactly why we should do this, he covered her hand with his. Together, we're stronger. She didn't say yes or no, but for the first time in years, she allowed herself to think about personal happiness, not survival, not money, not the children's future, but her own. About being a woman nearly 40, who had endured so much, and maybe deserved a little joy. Omar was gentle, caring, intelligent. With him she felt safe, not from external threats, but from the emptiness inside that had always haunted her. He accepted her as she was, with her past, her children, her scars. Maybe this was love? She thought, falling asleep in his arms. Not passion, not obsession, but calm acceptance. The truth revealed itself by accident, through a forgotten cell phone left on the table. A call came in, a woman's voice speaking Turkish, calling Omar her husband. Farah didn't know Turkish, but some words were clear enough. More than enough. She didn't make a scene. No screaming, no tears. When Omar came back, she simply handed him the phone and said, Your wife called. She sounded worried. He turned pale but quickly regained control. Farah, I can explain. No need, she shook her head. I understand. Business is business. It's not like that. He tried to take her hand, but she pulled away. Yes, I have a family in Turkey, but what we have, it's real. Real, she echoed. And the money you send to Turkey every month, is that real too? I've seen the reports, Omar. I'm not blind. He lowered his head, silent. There was nothing to say. I'm not cutting you out of the business, Farah said evenly. We're still partners. That doesn't change. But between us, it's over. She walked out of the office without looking back. Inside there was no fury, no heartbreak, just a strange emptiness. Another man, another betrayal. Once, it would have shattered her. Now it only left a bitter aftertaste of disappointment. That evening, for the first time in years, Farah cooked dinner herself. Not takeout, not something reheated, but real food, plov, the way her mother used to make. Fatima watched in quiet surprise but didn't interfere. At the table, when everyone was gathered, Farah looked at her sons. Ramin, almost a man now, sharp-eyed, jaw set in quiet defiance. Yunus, awkward in his teenage years, but already with flashes of maturity in his gaze. They were so easy to lose, not physically, but emotionally, and she had almost lost them already. I want to talk to you, she said, setting down her fork. About us. About what's been. About what's ahead. They looked at her warily, bracing for more excuses, more promises. She'd made too many already, and broken just as many. I haven't been a good mother, Farah began plainly. I wasn't there when you were sick. I didn't listen to your school stories. I didn't hold you after nightmares. Ramin looked away. Yunus bit his lip. I thought the most important thing was to give you a roof, food, clothes, education, because I never had that when I was growing up. Her voice slowed as she searched for the words. I was afraid of poverty, afraid of depending on men, afraid you'd live as hard a life as I did. We know, Mama, Yunus said softly. Grandma told us how it was for you. But I missed the most important part, she went on, feeling the lump rise in her throat. It's not walls or money that make a home. It's love, presence, time together. Ramin raised his eyes. In them, questions, doubt, but also a flicker of hope. I can't bring back the years I lost, Farah said, holding his gaze. But I can try to be here now, if you'll let me. Silence filled the room, not heavy, but resonant, thick with unspoken feelings. Then Yunus stood, walked around the table, and threw his arms around her, tight, desperate, as if afraid she might vanish again. We missed you, Mama, he whispered. Farah wept, holding her younger son, her eyes fixed on Ramin, her firstborn, her pain and her pride, her deepest wound, her strongest joy. For him, it was the hardest. He remembered everything, from the very beginning. I don't know if I can trust again, he said finally. We've started over too many times. I know, she nodded, still clutching Yunus. But I'll keep trying. Every day. Even if it takes years. Ramin studied her for a long time. Then slowly he rose and placed his hand on her shoulder. Not a hug, but the first step. I'll wait, he said simply. Outside, dusk fell, turning the city into a sea of lights. Somewhere out there, among the concrete jungle, steel frames of new buildings were rising, structures her company built. Strong, steady, meant to last for centuries. But the real steel framework was here, in this room, the invisible yet tangible bond between a mother and her sons. Bent, rusted by time and trials, but still able to carry the weight of the future. A foundation to be reinforced. Beams to be restored. A home that could be rebuilt. Together. The sky above the town was the same as it had been 24 years ago, endless, piercingly blue, with wisps of clouds like tufts of cotton candy. Farah stood on a hill, watching workers raised across atop a new church. Her church, built with her money, by her orders. Beautiful, said the foreman, wiping sweat from under his helmet. It'll be seen from miles away. She nodded, eyes fixed on the sunlit cross. Strange, she had never been very religious. Her mother had taught her prayers, but at school faith was dismissed as superstition. Later, in the Mexican village, she'd followed Catholic rituals, but more out of fear than conviction. She had stepped inside a church only once, on that black day in San Diego, when she'd lost everything and gone searching for comfort. And now, she was building a temple. Not a mosque, not a synagogue, a Christian church, because most of the townsfolk were Christian. Did it matter what name the house of God carried? Farah thought, watching sunlight dance on the cross. God was one, the rest was just language. It wasn't faith that drove her, but the need for redemption, for all she had done and all she hadn't, for the years of absence, even for that curse in the courtroom long ago when anger and pain pushed her to spit out cruel words. The bells that would soon ring over this valley were meant to wash it all away, to give her the peace she hadn't known since she was 16. She saw Jack at the church on the day of its consecration. She almost didn't recognize him, a man gone soft and heavy, balding, with sagging eyes. There was nothing left of the boy who once kissed her under the stars. Farah. He stepped toward her hesitantly as the crowd spilled out after the service. Farah Darwish. She turned, studying the unfamiliar face. Somewhere deep in his eyes, a spark still lingered, the same spark that had once set her blood on fire. But now it was just a dying ember. Jack, she nodded, surprised at her own calm. No anger, no bitterness, not even regret, just a faint sadness, like seeing a ghost from long ago. You've changed. So have you. He smiled weakly. You look even better. I hear you're some wealthy businesswoman in Los Angeles now. And you? She asked, not out of interest, but courtesy. District judge, he shrugged. Not exactly a success story. I live in the next town. Alone. Alone? Farah echoed, suddenly remembering the curse she had laid on him 20 years before. Married 3 times, he cut in with a bitter laugh. Never had kids. Doctors say it's me, something wrong. He stumbled, unable to say the medical term. Basically, I'm infertile. Can you believe it? The Cameron line ends with me. She stayed silent, looking not at him but at the church's cross glowing in the late sun. A strange feeling swept through her, not triumph, not satisfaction, but sorrow. For her 16-year-old self, scared and abandoned. For him at 18, too weak to stand against his family. For Ramin, who grew up without a father. For all the children who might have been born, but never were. Forgive me, Jack said, his voice raw with a pain so real that Farah looked into his eyes. I was a coward. I betrayed you. I betrayed our son. Our son. At last, after more than 20 years, he said it. Have you ever seen him? She asked. Ramin? From a distance, Jack admitted, lowering his gaze. When he visited his grandmother. He's a handsome young man, looks like I did once. And like me too, Farah said gently. He has my strength. My will. Jack nodded without looking up. I'd like to talk to him someday, if he wants to. That's his choice, she answered. He's grown. I'll tell him what you said. They stood there, 2 people once bound by youth and passion and dreams, now divided by decades of pain and silence. Yet something still tied them together, a thin thread of shared blood flowing in their son's veins. I forgive you, Jack, Farah said, and the words came easier than she expected. I forgave you a long time ago. I had to. Otherwise, I couldn't have gone on living. She didn't add that she had also forgiven herself, for the curse, for the bitterness and hate she had carried for so long, for everything that had shaped her into who she was now, strong, but scarred. He stared at her in disbelief, as if forgiveness after all these years was impossible. Thank you, he whispered. I don't deserve it, but thank you. Farah only nodded and walked toward her waiting car. She didn't turn back, but she knew Jack was watching her go, just as he had years ago, when she'd walked away from his porch with a broken heart and fragile life growing inside her. Only now she left with her head high, leaving the past where it belonged, behind her. Omar came back into her life unexpectedly, calling from the airport to ask if he could stop by. She invited him for dinner, not entirely sure why she was saying yes to a man who had once hurt her. He had changed, leaner now, with eyes shadowed by fatigue and a new kind of wisdom. He sat at her dining table, her spacious, well-furnished apartment, and glanced at the family photos on the walls. Divorced, he said flatly. It wasn't easy, not in our traditions. But I couldn't live a lie any longer. Farah set a cup of strong cardamom coffee in front of him, just the way he liked it. Why are you telling me this? She asked, sitting across from him. Because I love you, he answered simply. Always have. Even when I did everything to ruin what we had. She studied him, searching her own heart. Was there still love? Or only the memory of it? Could she trust him again? Did she even want to? I'm not asking you to marry me, Omar went on, as if reading her thoughts. Not now. Maybe not ever. But I want to be near you, as a friend, as a partner, as someone who will stand by you, no matter what. Farah stirred sugar into her cup slowly, thoughtful. Life had given her so many lessons, hard, merciless ones. She had started over more times than she could count, always alone, relying only on herself. But now she was different, stronger, wiser. Experience had stripped her of blind trust, but it hadn't shut her off from the world. We can try, she said at last. But don't rush me. I've had too many disappointments. So have I, Omar said, brushing her hand lightly. But I'll wait as long as it takes. By 2003, Farah's business empire had grown to an impressive scale. 3 construction companies, a chain of building material showrooms, profitable real estate across Los Angeles and beyond. She no longer stood at job sites in a hard hat studying blueprints. That was for her hired specialists. But every major project still passed through her hands, through her approval. And finally, she had found balance between work and family, home and time for dinner, weekends with her children, caring for her aging mother. Fatima now lived in comfort, in a spacious apartment with an ocean view. But the years of hardship had left their mark: heart problems, arthritis, shortness of breath. God let me live to see happy days, she said, stroking the head of her great-grandson, Ramin's firstborn. To see our family continue. What more could I ask for? Ramin, now a young man, worked as CFO of his mother's company. From her he inherited business instincts, from his grandmother wisdom and patience, from the father he never knew, the looks that made women turn their heads. His quiet wife from Chicago had given him a son, named after his great-grandfather, Ahmed. Yunus, a 19-year-old architecture student, had also found his place in the family business, heading the design department, responsible for interiors. A dreamer at heart, he created projects blending east and west. The old shack on the town's edge, where Farah once plastered walls with baby Ramin in her arms just for bread, had been torn down. In its place now stood a large family estate with a garden, the Darwish summer residence. Each year they gathered there, at the long table, planning the future, remembering the past. The spirit of the times was social responsibility, and Farah embraced it wholeheartedly. Her foundation supported young single mothers, those caught in circumstances so much like her own once were. Scholarships for education, housing assistance, places for their children in good preschools. Why bother? Some business colleagues asked. You can get tax breaks other ways. Farah only smiled. They couldn't understand that this wasn't about taxes. Every time she saw a young woman with a child in her arms, standing at the edge of a new life, she saw herself, scared, lost, but determined to survive at any cost. If I can make their road even a little easier than mine, she thought as she signed another check, then all those trials weren't for nothing. On her 45th birthday, Farah gathered her whole family around a festive table. Fatima sat in her chair at the head, with her great-grandson on her lap. Ramin with his wife, expecting their second child. Yunus with his fiancée, a conservatory student. Omar, now officially her partner in life and business. Dr. Salem, who had become family. Old friends, new allies. The tables were set in the garden of the estate, beneath apple trees planted by Farah's grandfather. Somehow those trees had survived every storm of history and now bore fruit gathered by great-grandchildren. Children, Ramin's boy and the guests' kids, ran across the lawn. Their laughter and shouts, flashing between the trees, were a striking contrast to the silence that once hung here when Farah was a child. Back then the yard was empty and forgotten, like the whole village weighed down by poverty and neglect. Now it was alive again, full of hope. After the toasts and congratulations, Farah stood, her gaze sweeping over everyone. She remembered how she once dreamed only of escape from this place, of big cities, a different life, freedom. She had gotten all of that, but at the cost of losses and pain she wouldn't wish on anyone. And now the circle had closed. She had returned not broken, but victorious. She had brought prosperity, revived a dying town, built a home on the ruins, given a future where there once was only the past. I want to say a few words, she said, and the gathering grew quiet. She spoke about her journey, about the lessons life had taught her, about the strength that lives in every person and awakens in the hardest times. When she finished, silence hung in the air. Then Fatima began to cry, quietly, silently, tears running down her wrinkled cheeks. She alone fully understood her daughter's road, because she had walked her own, no less hard, but quieter, in the shadow of a despotic husband, chained by tradition and fear. Ramin stood and raised his glass. To you, Mama. To the woman who showed us that the impossible is possible. Everyone stood, lifting their glasses. At that moment, little Ahmed, Ramin's son, ran to his grandmother and hugged her knees. Grandma's the Iron Lady, he declared loudly, repeating something he must have heard from the grown-ups. Laughter rippled through the garden, breaking the tension. Farah scooped her grandson into her arms, kissing the crown of his head. Of all the titles she had carried in her life, daughter, mother, businesswoman, benefactor, this new one was the sweetest. Grandma. The evening faded into golden light, illuminating the cross of the new church on the hill. The wind, the same northern wind that had followed Farah all her life, brushed her hair, now streaked with silver. The daughter of the wind stood in the garden that was once a wasteland, surrounded by the family she had built with her own hands, under the sky that had witnessed all her tears and smiles. The circle was complete. The humiliated girl had become the matriarch. The cycle of life closed, only to begin again, in her children, her grandchildren, and those who would come after. Thank you, life, Farah thought, gazing at the sunset sky. For everything. For every pain, for every joy. For the path that made me who I am. So ends the story of a woman tested again and again, but never broken. Farah's journey, from a shamed pregnant girl to the matriarch of a thriving family, reminds us of the invisible strength within us all. Her life wove together ancient traditions and modern struggle, a mother's love and fate's cruelty, despair and triumph. What touched you most in her story? Which moment made your heart ache? Or maybe you've lived through something similar yourself. If this story moved you, leave a like, share it with someone who needs reminding of the inner strength that carries us through the darkest times. And of course, subscribe to our channel for more stories of lives that teach us what truly matters. The human heart can endure so much more than we think possible.